Well, everyone, good morning. Welcome to another iGaming breakfast briefing here at Healy's. And today is a little bit different than what we usually do. We often talk about changes in regulation, maybe banking regulation, maybe legislation, maybe pending legislation. But today we're kind of firmly in the field of marketing and management. So this is going to be pretty interesting and a little bit different from what we normally do. And to help us do that, we've got Mike Rothwell to my left from Caesars. To his left, we have Mr. David Schollenberger. He's obviously our host today from Healy Solicitors. We've got Richard Wade from Rank, John Duffy from Genting. We've got Andrew Tottenham from Tottenham & Co. And let's see, on the screen behind me, coming all the way from the United States of America, where it's apparently 3 in the morning for him. So forgive him if he's slightly drunk. We have Mr. Michael Pollack. And he's from Spectrum Gaming. So welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Now, if anyone has any questions, feel free to raise your hand at any time, and I'll point to you, and you can just ask it out loud. If you don't worry. I have plenty prepared. And the first one I have prepared, I'd like to ask Andrew and Michael this question. Why do you think that land-based operators have been relatively slow to launch online? Here we are in 2017, and yes, there are online operations from land-based operators, but mostly nowhere near the scale, the size, or the resource applied to it as you have for the online-only casino operators. Gentlemen.
Can we start? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I would say that they weren't. If you remember, way back in the late 90s, early 2000s, operators jumped in with both feet. And I'm talking about people like Gala, Harrah's, and what they discovered was that they had no idea about what it was to develop software, to maintain it, and also that they were pretty crap at marketing. And as a consequence, they lost huge amounts of money, and they moved out of it because they discovered it wasn't a business they understood. So it's taken them quite a long time to get back in, and that would be my take on it.
Michael, what is your opinion?
Well, I'm going to give you a U.S. perspective on this. The reluctance from the U.S. perspective, the reluctance of land-based operators to jump in with both feet initially is not only not surprising, it was actually quite predictable. 15 years, as far back as 15 years ago, we projected that would be the approach, that land-based operators would start with an extreme reluctance and a view that online was a threat to ultimately to acceptance and eventually embrace, and we're moving along that continuum to be. And we looked at this basically by looking at other industries that had been challenged by emerging technologies that changed the way we all live and do business. And I think it's kind of interesting. We looked at the relationship between, going back to the 1920s, essentially a full century ago, as to how the internet of its day, radio, threatened professional sports, which initially viewed it as a way that people weren't going to come to stadiums because they can listen to games on radio. And ultimately, obviously, professional sports accepted and then embraced broadcasting as a critical part of its business model. A more recent example is how Hollywood was threatened by the internet of its day, which was television. People weren't going to go to movies because they could stay home and watch television. But as we recognize, television became a critical part of Hollywood's business model. And we see that precisely the same thing unfolding with respect to land-based operators in the U.S. Because don't forget, there's 1,000 casinos in the U.S. doing $70 billion U.S. dollars annually. So with a lot of capital invested. So it's not surprising they followed that same continuum. We are now at a different point. We are now at the point where it's clearly acceptance and moving toward embrace. That's where we are in the U.S.
And of course, in 2004, we had MGM come online. You saw Sun Casinos go online. Stanley Ho's been on and offline. I'm not sure if they have an online operation right now, but they were clearly an early adapter. But you also saw people dip their toe in and come out of the online business that were early adopters. For instance, MGM was only online for, I think, 2 years. Why do you think that there was a slow start to those early adopters? A lot of you were around at that time, so to anyone really on the panel.
I'd say they started, if you remember, in Isle of Man, and the regulations were not very friendly. It was very difficult to build up any kind of mass because you had to do, people had to fax in their copies of their passports. There was a whole KYC that was just very, very difficult for customers to comply with, and so it just finished up as a loss-making concern, so it came out of it. So it was regulatory.
I worked for Stanley Leisure back in 2000, and we had Stanley Acropolis, and I remember we actually gave out the discs in the casino to the customer, licensed in Curacao. It wasn't a tremendous success.
Yeah,
No, I absolutely remember that.
yeah, I would agree that the regulation, in fact, certainly from the UK, insofar as it wasn't legal to actually operate from this country, so we all had to immediately go offshore, which is in itself was quite a big commitment. I mean, it's not a slow process, as Andy said. I mean, we started in 2001 with our own rank.com, a similar approach with handing out discs. We bought Blue Square in 2002 to buy in the expertise, which was then, I think, it was the first online bookmaker over here. And we plugged away ever since, but certainly I think the regulation and then having to operate with two separate fields was difficult. But I think that one of the biggest things we also had was cultural, and I think it's been mentioned already, a very good analogy Mike made in terms of Hollywood, etc. The fear of the new baby that's come in and is going to cause, destroy their existing business. To get our managers to accept that it was a good thing to promote the online business. To our biggest asset is the fact that we've got a whole database of customers who are gamblers, who therefore could thrive as a new online business. But the natural instinct is to think, why would I promote online to my customer, because I will lose my business? And it took quite a few years, and in fact the thing that changed it was when it came home to them that we have now, or certainly a year or two ago, about 3% of our customers from our retail casinos play with us online.
3%.
3% or so. This was the old figures, but they're not too far off. 3% of them play with us online, but 50% of them play online. And that made a huge difference to people to say, we're not talking about them stealing your retail business online. We're talking about stealing other online business to go on online, because they are playing online anyway. So either you get them to play on our site, or they're just going to play with 888 or whoever it is. And that was really a big turning point culturally, I think, for people to suddenly embrace the idea of, yes, we will promote grosvenorcasino.com or mecabingo.com as something that is well worth pursuing for the greater good of the company, and it's not stealing money from that gaming table online, it's stealing it from someone else's live game or online game, and that has made a significant change. So now our focus is very much towards online, has been for 2 or 3 years since our CEO Henry Birch joined us, and that sort of joined up thinking is the strength that's been missing, and I think, as Andrew said, had that been there from 2002, 3, 4, along with the software expertise, we would all have been a lot further down the line. But there is always that sort of concern of something new and frightening that's threatening, and I think that threat has to be neutralised and seen as a positive rather than a threat to make it a success.
And another factor, I think, that created reluctance of some of the largest global operators to get involved in it is just the regulatory risk. They were used to knowing inside out the regulation in the U.S. states and the UK and wherever they had land-based casinos, suddenly online gaming is a global pursuit. There are different laws in every jurisdiction, and it's very difficult to control sometimes how where users are using your products. So just the risk of regulatory sanctions on their kind of bread and butter licenses was I think a factor too, in not jumping into it with both feet until it was really a proven kind of product.
Yeah, I think you guys are all you're right on that. We're talking about asset risks, right? You're talking about the risk of the asset of the license. If you lose that land-based license, then all of a sudden you're out of business. You can no longer operate. If you accidentally take a bet from somewhere you shouldn't, and therefore that affects your terrestrial casino business, you're done. You've got the risk of the physical asset then at that point. So, I mean, look at Caesars. If Caesars took a misstep in 2001, there are billions and billions and billions of dollars worth of land and materials and assets and gaming machines that would be at risk. So